Now we are going to talk about American elections. Live from New York, we have political analyst John Kovalich joining us again to give his analysis on the ongoing Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the meeting as well. Welcome, Mr. Kovalich. Thank you so much for joining us once again. We've been talking about various issues with you nowadays, but let's talk about SEO for now. Turkish President, as you know, Erdogan met with Russian President Putin yesterday in Astana, where they discussed a number of different topics, but one of the most important topics during that discussion was Erdogan and Putin's collaboration on nuclear power projects for the energy security of both Turkey and Russia. What is your take on the recent developments?
It was an interesting meeting in large measure because for both men, there are two critical issues to solve. For Turkey, President Erdogan is focused on Syria, in which Russia plays a substantial role, and then the Ukraine-Russia war, which is immensely impactful upon Turkey. With that, you have a substantial commercial, economic, financial relationship between the Russian Federation and Turkey, particularly the nuclear power plant, one which is under construction. There are discussions of more. There are pipelines. So there's a lot to the relationship, and it it makes a dynamic that that can be uncomfortable because both men need each other to solve each other's problems. They're not able to be solved unilaterally, and with the Russian-Ukraine war in its third year, with increasing pressure upon the Russian Federation and President Zelensky in Ukraine to stop the war. Um, there just is the stress level amongst everyone increases, and I think that we're going to continue to see these issues be public, but there's going to be a lot going on privately. So President Erdogan did what he needed to do during the meeting with President Putin. Some of the statements from Dmitry Peskov, the presidential spokesman for President Putin, weren't exactly optimistic, but those are just statements made in public, so I don't get a lot of anxiety about them.
About this situation, President Erdogan also invited Putin to Turkey. How does that signal a shift in the geopolitical landscape, particularly in the light of current global tensions?
Shows that President Erdogan doesn't give up. President Erdogan, invited President Putin last year, and the visit has been postponed several times for several different official and unofficial reasons. But President Erdogan hasn't let it go, and he continues to want to welcome President Putin to Turkey, and I think eventually it'll happen. But it is presidents are they're heads of state, but they're also the chief marketing officers of their countries, and it's about making your country attractive for direct foreign investment, for business of any type, but it's also making your country relevant. And Turkey is relevant. But I think it was, it was good that President Erdogan didn't drop it. President Putin did respond that yes, it'll happen. So they keep those swinging doors swinging, and that's a good thing.
About also how does the current trade volume of $55 billion between Russia and Turkey reflect the broader economic relationship, and what challenges could arise, if any, in reaching $100 billion target?
It's going to be a challenge as long as the Russian Federation Ukraine war continues, because it's not that the government of Turkey and companies in Turkey and the government of Russia and companies in Russia do not want engagement and re-engagement where the relationship during the last 2+ years been compromised or severed. But there is a simple reality that um, international sanctions, led by the United States and led by the 27 members of the European Union, make it's almost like a python snake. It's constrictive. It's like a slow suffocation. And Turkey's commercial, economic, financial, political relationship with Russia has been caught um, in that snake vice, um, and from the Russian standpoint as well. And so President Erdogan has it's an incredibly delicate balance that he has to maintain because Turkey is a member of NATO, the second largest military force in NATO. It is a huge, regional player because of its real estate where it operates in. It is a huge commercial player globally because of the reach of Turkish companies. But yet, that relationship with Russia from an energy standpoint, as President Erdogan talked about, 7 million visitors from Russia into Turkey. I've been on those Turkish Airlines flights to Moscow. There are 5, 7 flights a day, and these are A320s. These are big aircraft. So there's a lot of activity, but then there's the war, and as long as the war continues, which President Erdogan is open to try to do what he can to end it, that's gonna be a constraint on moving that 50 billion to 60, 70, or 100 billion, where it really should be.
About the war, though, given the unique position of maintaining relations with both Russia and Ukraine, how important is Erdogan's proposal for a peace process between the two countries? What would you say about that?
He started off, when the war began, Turkey was in an unusual place in that it had relations with both countries. He was the only guy. He was the only head of state that was talking to both President Zelensky and President Putin. It was because of that relationship, he was able to be instrumental with the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Unfortunately, President Putin suspended participation, and when he did that, the Ukrainians and other countries, including with assistance from the government of Turkey, they created a new channel, basically having the ships hug the coast in the Black Sea and then making their way through the Bosphorus. So President Putin hurt himself, and President Erdogan, I think, said the message: don't pull out of this, because if you do, you're losing your leverage. And President Putin didn't listen, and he did, and so that's gone by the wayside. Turkish companies are in Ukraine. They were there before the war in a huge way, particularly the construction companies, military cooperation, and then of course Turkey's overall relationship with Russia. So it's been like I said, this delicate balance, for President Erdogan to maintain relationships with both governments, which are important and which have been useful for Turkey, including getting those 2 military aircraft back a year ago that were sitting at Kiev's international airport, and to get military aircraft in the air. President Putin and President Zelensky both had to sign off on it. President Erdogan was able to get that happening. He's made all the right statements about Russia and Turkey and Ukraine in international forums. So he's doing everything right. The problem is you've got President Putin and President Zelensky who have to decide that they prefer to have peace rather than war. But President Erdogan is sort of doing what he does, which is he stays focused, keeps using the bully pulpit, and hopefully, both countries will see that Turkey has a continuing role to play.
Sure, the meeting is still continuing today as well, but I do wonder about the reflections in the United States as well, because you were talking about how important it is when the resolution about the Russian-Ukraine war and the relationship with Russia and Turkey perhaps is quite interesting for a United States, which is about to get into its elections. So do you think that you are going to see any outcomes, any reflections of this meeting in the United States as well?
Again, President Erdogan will be the last um, leader, in this case, NATO leader, who will have sat with President Putin before a major meeting, whether NATO, G20, invited to G7, United Nations General Assembly. That's sort of been a pattern the last 2+ years, and that makes incredibly important rolling into next week when the 32 country members of NATO will be meeting in Washington, D.C. for the 75th anniversary. President Erdogan will be there. What President Erdogan will have is the last face to face communication with President Putin. And that's important. And I know that the other 31 members are going to want to know, okay, we watched aNews, we read, we see what was in public, we see what Peskov said, we see what you said, we see what Putin said. Now, President Erdogan, sit with us privately, off the record, and tell us what you all talked about. What was the body language? What do you think is possible? And that's incredibly important because everyone else only has others to watch. Prime Minister Modi of India will also have been meeting with President Putin. So he's engaging, and President Xi, of course. So President Putin is engaging with the group. But next week in Washington, President Erdogan is once again going to have something that none of the other 31 members have, which is putting aside, Dmitry Peskov's statement that it's impossible for Turkey to have a role in mediation. Um, President Zelensky will also be in Washington, so President Erdogan will be able to give some insight that others can't, and perhaps lay the foundations for some continuing discussions. Russia-Ukraine war is important with respect to the U.S. presidential elections in November, but more and more it's about domestic issues, and there is a feeling now that the war needs to come to a conclusion. There needs to be a ceasefire. And so everyone will be watching to see who can do anything. And right now, President Erdogan will have something to talk about with the other 31 members.
Lastly, about the significance of the Shanghai Cooperation Summit, but you were talking about it actually, but I would also like to ask about the regional security and cooperation, as well as the role that Turkey could play as a dialogue partner in the organization.
President Erdogan has said that Turkey would like to become a formal member. Turkey is also interested in becoming a member of BRICS, which, of course, they all share a common membership. It's important. A lot of times people forget that governments are about themselves first and about others second. And so when there is some criticism about Turkey potentially becoming a member of BRICS, becoming a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement, that the simple reality is, shouldn't we all be saying we want more engagement? We want more heads of state and heads of government to be able to talk to one another to try to work out issues, whether it's Armenia and Azerbaijan, whether it's issues relating within Georgia, whether it's Syria, which is a huge issue for the government of Turkey in terms of the expense for 13 years, the social problems that have caused. And President Erdogan, he has stepped forward and said, okay, President Assad, let's try to do something. And even though that's Syria, Syria has connectivity to Russia. And so when Turkiye is a member of more organizations and alliances and allegiances and that Russia's a part of, that China's a part of, they're all together, and that is helpful rather than they're all talking from outward inward. So um, Turkey becoming a member of both groups, potentially financially and commercially, can be beneficial to Turkey, and that is President Erdogan's primary job. And then secondarily, it can potentially help with more integration for discussions to help resolve some international issues. So, uh, I'm in the camp that says these are good ideas for the government of Turkey, as opposed to, these are east-west and these are confrontational, and these are, not something that a NATO member, et cetera, should be involved in. It just that's really short-sighted, because the world is changing, the demographics are changing, the politics are changing, and President Erdogan, Prime Minister Modi of India, Lula of Brazil, they all sort of get it. We talk about the global South, and I think some of the rest of the countries in the developed world have to sort of catch up to this strategy.
So about the NATO summit that we were talking about earlier, I would also like to pick your mind about that also, because we know that the US President Biden is going to join the NATO summit. Maybe is one of the last of his chances to join such a situation before the election happens. And also we have a hectic meeting coming up. We have the SCO happening there, and we are expecting G20 to happen. So what would you say about the world leaders in the light of the elections that is taking place in the UK and France and Iran, and also all together we have a hectic international schedule? As I'm talking, I'm remembering many more stuff as well. So what would you say, how would you evaluate the situation in the names of international relations between the countries? What do we expect from the upcoming summits as well?
Yeah, the list you read off is impressive, and as you said, you read off some of them. Tonight we'll know who the next prime minister is of the United Kingdom, and next week that new person will be representing the United Kingdom as a member of NATO at the 75th anniversary summit in Washington, D.C. The next president of Iran, we will know soon, and the acting president, President Erdogan, met with in Astana, as did others. You have, the after NATO, you have then the United Nations General Assembly in September, the G20 in November in Rio. So the G20, we're going to see either President Biden getting ready to continue into his second term or ending his first term, but he'll still be there. President Putin could be at the G20 in Rio, but next week, is going to be interesting, because it it reinforces the fragility, but also the reality and the robustness and the strength of democracies, because it does show these organizations, these alliances continue. The players within them can change, but the alliances continue. And next week, we see, an alliance that added Finland and Sweden, because they were able to accept the requests of President Erdogan. At the same time, the government of Turkey had requests as well, and that made the alliance stronger. Next week, President Biden will be hosting these 32 members. In the last, week, it's all been about his performance at the engagement debate with former President Trump last Thursday. There have been calls for him to step aside, and it's incredibly ugly, and it's also just sad, because people are asking him to step aside because of his his perspectives, his views, his policies. They're asking him to step aside because they just perceive him to be too old. And it's not how old he is; it's how he is acting, being old. And it's it's quite corrosive. Next week, he's going to be with these 32 members. The White House has already said he's going to do a press conference. Um, but we don't know what kind of bilaterals is he going to have, what kind of structured meetings is he going to have, pull asides in the formal sessions. Is he going to be reading from note cards? Is he going to be using his teleprompter? So we've got all this going on, and then we have the realities where some of these heads of state and heads of government, we'll use President Erdogan, will have just gotten back from sitting down with President Putin. And so that would seemingly make a really important moment for the two of them to have a discussion, or the three of them with President Zelensky. No one knows how this is going to happen because of what's happened last week, and I think it's really disrupted what we might see at NATO, because you're going to have a good number of the NATO members who don't want Donald Trump returning. They're not excited about President Biden, but they don't want Donald Trump. So are they going to be coalescing? Are they going to be trying to protect him? And then is the media going to be reporting on that protection? So it's the timing isn't all that great, but I'm sure President Erdogan is going to take good advantage of the time he's going to have with those other 31 members.
John, thank you so much. Those are the times that I feel like we love our job as journalists the most, because international gossip is going to happen for a while, and we're going to be all eyes in the United States during the NATO meeting. So it is quite interesting, and I am looking forward to it. Thank you so much for joining us here on aNews.
Thank you.